and corruption involved in ruling with the government. So the scholars stayed far away from being close to rulers. Even when poor Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, they called the fifth of the Khulafa Rashidun, he became the ruler, the ulama stayed away from him. That man, what about the men we have today? One has to be very careful in dealing with him. But it's necessary for the ulama to go meet them, talk with them, and since the government has only made, the only people who have any access to the government are the members of, for example, certain organizations set up by the government, then some ulama have to take that position. That's necessary. So we shouldn't doubt that unless we see that they do and say things to flatter the government and to give the wrong opinion based on the desires of the government. But inshallah, that is inshallah not happening with many of those people. The great ulama in Saudi Arabia, for example, inshallah, I see from them devotion and to duty. Of course, there's differences of opinion sometimes about different matters, but I don't believe that they've ever been corrupted by the government. But there are other people who are ulama also, judges who are very corrupt, unfortunately, who we don't have to name. But unfortunately in Saudi Arabia, for example, the Shari'ah courts are probably the most corrupt part of the whole government system. The ones that are fully manned by so-called scholars are the most corrupt, unfortunately. Somebody said, how should we deal with each other in matters of ijtihad and differences of opinion, and how does the Salaf deal with them? Well, of course, there have been differences of opinion even among the Sahaba. And the right way of dealing with them is in brotherhood, with respect. We should be able to argue with each other based on the evidence without making accusations, causing enmity and hatred among each other, and killing each other. This is the great fitna. The worst thing that could ever happen to me that I can imagine is that I would be responsible for the death of an innocent person. If I call for the death of people, and that's carried out, how am I going to face Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment? How is that going to happen? The people who love death and destruction, who are full of enmity towards Muslims, those are the evil people whom we should be aware of.
Do you have a question related to what he's saying? Yes. Would you have to write it down?
Yes. No, he can say it. No problem.
Well, it comes to them from youth upon them. Certainly, it has been used with kufar to fight against Muslims. Thirdly, he imprisons anyone who demands the Shari'ah. Fourthly, he implements riba, which says in the bad sense that if a ruler implements something which is known to the deen by the necessity of being haram, even if he doesn't say believe in that thing, that thing makes him accountable and has to be. What does the position of that?
Well, what you're talking about, first of all, when you translate it as taking the Jews and Christians as friends, that's unfortunately a loose translation. What we're talking about is wilaya, what's called wala and bara. That our support is for the Muslims and we have nothing to do with the non-Muslims. That doesn't mean that we don't treat non-Muslims with respect, friendliness, deal with them on the common courtesy and all those kind of things which people call friendship. So if people call friendship being nice to people, talking with them, visiting with them, being fair with them, this is not wala. This is just common courtesy of the Muslims. This is how the Prophet ﷺ treated the kuffar and how the Sahaba and the Salaf treated the unbelievers, hoping of course to call them to Islam. Wilaya is when our loyalty is to kufr and to the people of kufr. When we take our commandments from them, this is wala. I don't want to get into detail because that's a whole other topic. But the fact is, many rulers of countries have taken the Jews and Christians as their allies against the Muslims. when the kafirs tell them, kill these Muslims, arrest these Muslims, they do it. When the kafirs say, appoint so-and-so to a position, they do it. This is clearly wala, and some of the rulers do this in the Islamic world, and some of them do not. Most of our rulers, unfortunately, because of military weakness and corruption, are forced to make some kind of compromises with the unbelievers. And this is not necessarily a cause of takfir. Takfir is very dangerous, and it has to be done very specifically. And it's wrong for us to get involved in that kind of thing without clear knowledge, clearly consulting with scholars about those matters, because it can be a source of fitna and bloodshed and revolt, and it's very dangerous. And if we're mistaken and we call a person a kafir for the wrong reasons, then we have ourselves committed a great major sin in Islam. If we raise the sword against a Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ called that kufr. And if we make takfir against a Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ called that kufr. Of course, that's kufr asghar. So we must make a distinction between those people and those rulers who say that there's no place for Sharia, or it has a limited place, or that there's a major place or any place for the qanun or non-Islamic law, and those who claim to follow Islamic law but do so imperfectly. There should be a big difference between that. Yeah.
Something that they need to demand. And the other person example we're not talking about is the shrine and the akbar yourself to them. For example, many Muslim countries today are part of the UN. And the constitution of the UN is kufr. When you sign the constitution, you sign your demand away from the masjid. So how do we obey these rulers? And out of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as seen a nasiha applied to rulers who they believe in Shari'ah, and we're not even legitimate Amir or Imam. How does this hadith
Yeah. Jazakallah khair. Listen, a lot of things that Muslim countries do, they do it for reasons that are sometimes not apparent to people. They do it sometimes even to protect Muslims. Sometimes they do things that we don't like to protect us from the enemies of Islam. Sometimes they join an organization, for example, the United Nations, to further some benefit to the Muslims. Obviously, it's our duty as Muslims. Listen, brother, listen. It's our duty as Muslims to try to practice Islam as best we can do it, and try to take a practical approach to things. We have a duty to our brothers and sisters no matter what the governments do. When our brothers in certain countries are being oppressed and killed or harmed, it's our duty to help them as much as we can. And there are a lot of things that we can do besides talking. Raising money to feed them, help orphans, and tell people to support them as much as we can with our money and our prayers, and strive as much as we can to support movements in the Islamic world that bring benefit to the Muslims. But if I get into accusing specific people of specific things, it's going to be very dangerous, because we have to have a lot of information. I know.
This topic cannot be done generally, because all the rulers nowadays, the so-called Muslim ones, they've extended Allah's Shari'ah, they've implemented man-made laws, they've made adab the enemies to Islam, and you have to be specific.
Yeah, all of the rulers haven't done that. A lot of just to sum it up, not to, a lot of the times Muslim rulers believe in the Sharia and say, or at least say they do, and they do not implement it fully. And this is not kufr akbar, this is kufr asghar. Their lack of implementation. No, that's it. That's it. Anyway, the whole lecture showed the difference between kufr akbar and kufr asghar. And it's very important for us to understand that. Because if we err in that, we will pay the penalty for the error on the Day of Judgment. So we must distinguish between those two things. And I certainly can't go through that whole discussion again.
Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah before the Tatar, because they added the Shari'ah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They implemented al-Yasik. They took the Jews and Christian laws and they implemented on the Muslims. And Shaykh al-Islam revolted against it. Is this legitimate or not?
The Tatars were kafirs who, for their interests, decided to declare themselves Muslims and refused to establish Shari'ah in any aspect. And the Shaykh al-Islam clearly led the Muslims in jihad against them and defeated them, alhamdulillah. And that's a whole different aspect, because the Tatars could in no way be called Muslims, and in no stretch of the term. But we must be very careful.